Good morning, everybody. Today I am starting an Instagram Live conversation with Brian Daly, whose solo show is currently on view in our main exhibition space. These are all hand-drawn pen and ink on paper. And I'm going to be inviting Brian in right now. This show is called Full Bleed. It's a beautiful show. It's a colorful show. It's a really precise show. I'll just pan around while I invite him in. Good morning, everybody.
All right, here we are.
Hey, Brian.
Good morning.
Morning. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Yeah, thanks for having me in my home.
Yeah. This is your studio in the background there with your microscope and inks and straight edges.
Yep, all that good stuff, the stuff that makes it happen.
Well, would you mind, I'll continue to just pan around, would you mind just introducing yourself? And the show's called Full Bleed. Maybe talk about where that title comes from, too.
Sure. I'm Brian Daly. Kevin's going to be showing you drawings/paintings of this show called Full Bleed. That name, I have a history. I was brought up in a house with two cartographers working for McGraw-Hill before computers. And in my high school experience wasn't really transformative in an educational, like a traditional educational way, but we were heavily rooted in graphic arts. Again, all before computers. So we had fully functioning multicolor printing, offset printing presses. We had full graphic capabilities, old school stuff, like Ruby Lith, arc plate burners, things like that. So I was trained at an early age, at my most impressionable age, to deal with art in terms of, reproduction quality, graphic arts, things like that. And Full Bleed, that's just something that happens to me, and I think it happens to a lot of artists, particularly people who work on paper. Is you start out with an idea, something gets you going, and you start to do. You're just gonna do a little test. You're gonna draw a little picture or write a little note, and before you know it, you have completely filled up the page or run in a direction that just ran right off the side of the page. And early on, when that would happen to me, I would get really frustrated. So I started putting crop marks or, framing, drawing a rectangle or a square or whatever shape I wanted to try and stay within that confine. Because in my mind, running to the edge of a page made it look like I had no control. And as I get older, I realize I do have no control. That's fine. The full bleed for this show and the crop marks that are added to the pieces, the little tick marks in the corners. In printing, that would be, you would use those marks to trim or crop the image. And it was half a joke, but half serious. What I really wanted to what I was focusing on in these pieces was the image within those crop marks. All those little color tests and all those little swatches and notes, those are things that just happen along the way. There's not really much of a plan for those. So they live in the periphery, similar to how they live in my mind while I'm drawing. Because when I'm drawing and laying out, and especially painting, I have to be so present. It's something I'm learning about using a paintbrush and liquids and inks. I can't be thinking about my personal life, my finances, what I don't like about that piece. I need to focus on each shape individually in real time. Otherwise, I fail time and again. So, the full bleed is the image I wanted to show, is that image within the crop marks.
Nice. And I think that it can be really difficult for most people who walk in the gallery and look at this work to understand just what goes in to making. So over here, we've got a few just visual aids, which we don't usually present during these shows, these solo shows, but for your work, it just seemed like we needed to, because Everybody's seen tools like this, but nobody knows how to use them. I don't know how to use them,
Sure.
especially the way that you use them. So, um, what are these tools, and
I
how do you?
mean, yeah, that one there, that little compass, that tiny little guy sitting there. Um, that's the one. Uh, not that particular compass. I have mine here at home, but the ruling pen. Um, it looks like a little pair of tweezers. That arm opposite the needle. The ruling pen is the thing that I am most concerned with, most fascinated by. It's so simple. This tool is coming up. I think it's 480 something years old, and it really hasn't changed, except for maybe some advancements in materials that they're made out of. Some of the finer ones, I'm not sure if that's one of them. Some of the finer ones have different alloys they use at the tip, and what that does is it limits the amount of times you have to hone or resharpen that tip, because they're very temperamental. The ruling pen, it's a double-edged sword, no pun intended. It can do things no other pen on the market can do. It can change line width just by turning that little screw. There's no other pen that does that. If you have an ink that is compatible with the paper and the paints and the other materials that you're using, um, if you have an ink you can use in that pen, you've replaced every other pen, as far as drawing consistent lines or arcs. You can't write with them. They're made to travel in one direction there's a margin of error. There's an angle you have to use these at, but they're very finicky. But that tool, so many people have them. Even during the opening, people were coming up to me like, "I have a jar of these."
Mhm.
People find them in drafting sets, which look cool. I'm not gonna lie, the tools look cool if you're a sciencey type person. And most people have no idea what that tool is. They don't know what it's
So,
called. They don't know what it does. And I've been using that tool since I was like 17 or 18.
so
And
in your drawings, where do you use this tool? What is this like?
um, that particular one, if it's attached to a compass, there's different variations of it. That's what pretty much all the white ink in all the pieces is done with one of two ruling pens.
It's like
Um, so anything that has a curved white line, even a segment, even the tiniest segment of a curved white line, that is done with a ruling pen attached to a compass, sometimes called a drop pen. And then all the straight lines are done with just a ruling pen. It has that nib, kind of like set up like a pencil, but it
so. Just
functions.
just to clarify for our audience here, these are the white lines drawn with those ruling pens. They look like paper because they're so thin. They're so
Yeah,
exact.
yeah, and you're limited. There's so many variables. You're limited to in the thickness of the line based on the consistency of the ink, and and it's hard to explain. Once you start with one of these pens, once that pen touches the tip of the paper, gravity is working hard to force all the ink that is trapped within that pen onto the page. So you have to adjust your pressure, your speed, your angle. Your tool has to be perfectly honed. Your ink has to be at the right consistency. And once it touches, you've got to move, and then you have to stop and remove that pen without it emptying onto the page. So it's kind of a personal goal for me to
It's,
to
they're
get
just
the
they're just open nibs, right? Where
yeah,
the ink goes in on this right side,
it's
it's
open.
the ink just kind of sits in there.
Yeah, and I compare a lot of what I do, and a lot of what I do is based on my fabricator mindset, and it's very similar to those watching who know how to TIG weld. It's like TIG welding. There's a drop of ink hanging at the very tip of that thing, and as soon as it touches the paper, capillary action is going to pull as much of that ink as it can out of the pen. So you have to move at an even pace, and when you're done, you have to remove it very carefully, so that gravity or even the speed at which you remove the pen from the paper can cause the ink to fly out. That's my water bell. Uh,
So all these white lines, Brian, they're all done with your ruling pen too.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the white line is the last thing to go on there, and it's terrifying. It's the most problem-laden process. It's terrifying because 5 or 6 times on those pieces, I had the pen empty out onto the page. Um, but I've mentally prepared for it and physically prepared for it in that I don't freak out. I know what I need to do. And it involves just taking your hand and just wiping that ink off the page the second it hits. You can't hesitate. If you do, it starts to get into the fibers of the paper, and there's no covering it up. All of these are acrylic ink, which is a translucent medium. There's no covering up. There's no erasing. You can't scratch it off like you can do with like India ink. It's You're fully committed throughout this process, and it can be a little terrifying. And part of me pushing the limits of this old technology, this almost 500-year-old pen, I wanted to bring in a lot of what I was seeing with Islamic artists, and just the sheer insanity of what they're able to accomplish with very old tools that haven't changed much. I want to bring it into a more modern context. I want to use it in machinist drawings and more modern, almost like textiles, is kind of what I'm going for. And ultimately, I'm just trying to make it hard on myself so that I can get comfortable with it and have an escape plan to know the limits of this tool and to see how far I can push it.
I think that's a good segue too into, another part of these drawings. Of course, from a distance, people see the color, they see the pattern, they see the precision, but in the margins, you've got all this tiny little writing, which is your handwriting. But can you tell us a little bit about where that handwriting comes from? What makes it into the drawing? Is there writing that doesn't make it in? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I used to work strictly in pen and ink, and so I always had a pen in my hand. And as my mind races. I'm a very sensitive person. I'm sensitive to everything, and everything inspires me. Now, when I was doing pen and ink drawings all the time, I could just jot a note down anywhere because that pen was in my hand. Now that I'm working with brushes and ruling pens, neither of which I can write with, there's a lot of writing that doesn't make it in because it requires me changing gears, stopping, putting down the pen, drying it out, waiting for the ink to dry, drawing a little line because I want them relatively straight. Um, and those notes, it's a lot of times it's a stream of consciousness. There are times like on this particular series, I had set out, this is all me gaining experience. I'm trying to learn and push limits and advance my skill set to carry me to the next project, whatever that is. And I had planned on taking detailed notes of what I was learning per piece with little arrows indicating where that happened to kind of illustrate to people who are interested in learning what I have learned, because I do want to share that information. I think sharing information, sharing process, is it's the greatest use of my work. I love to share what I learned, and these drawings are a way to do that. But being that I'm painting, a lot of stuff didn't make it in. And, with me, I have never once made a piece that ended up, I never hit my mark. I never get to draw or paint the thing that I set out to do because things change. So in those notes, sometimes there's overwhelming personal things. Sometimes at the end of the night, after I've sharpened my tools and I've cleaned my space, nulled everything so that I'm ready to go in the morning, halfway through my first cup of coffee, I might need to make a list of something I saw in there. Like, oh, there's one little bit that needs, will easily get lost in the fray if I don't hit it. Or what did you learn today? Or sometimes I reread those notes and I find some other meaning. I don't even remember writing. I don't even remember what it meant, but a key word might push me in another direction towards the next piece, or drastically change how I finish the piece I took the note in. So yeah, the notes are everything, apart from the image. And I've found over the years people like to read them, and if I can engage people by drawing them closer and closer and closer, then I know that they're taking the time. You know, it's such a great feeling to look at somebody looking at your art and their nose is a half inch from the page because they're trying to read this thing. And that's important to me, that people read the notes. And in the past, I've gotten in trouble by being too candid, say, with other people's information vaguely. So on this one, on this series, I did make an effort to keep some of the heavier personal things out, just out of respect for other people's privacy. Austin's a small town. Uh, some people might be able to discern what's going on between me and another person based on my notes, and I value my privacy, and I want people to respect it. So I'm learning to do the same.
Well, I think it's a really special detail, and not only are they personal, and not only do they sort of reflect just your overall attitude of always getting better at doing what you do, because a lot of these are just about the craft. They're funny too. And it's a lot of writing. I mean, there's 18 drawings in this exhibition, which is an incredible amount of these really tight, really precise, clearly labor-intensive drawings. Um, but I haven't even gotten all the way around to read everything yet.
Yeah,
It's
there
gonna
would
take.
be there would have been more, if not for the just the simple the texture of the paper. I'm working with Arch's cold pressed watercolor paper. It's like sandpaper on micron pens, which is what I use. I won't use any other pen on any of my work, just because they have the most pigment, they're the most vibrant, and they make a great product. I started using them 20 years ago and have tried all kinds of other things, but I also couldn't write as much. You'll notice there's different styles of handwriting in there, and people who know me over the years, they can tell what mood I was in by by how it's written. Like anybody else, when you go to jot down a note real quick, it can be kind of Charlie Manson and kind of scrawly and maybe run off the line or off the page. Sometimes those notes are the most important because it was one of those things. I have to get up, I have to write this down because there's no way I'm going to remember it. Um, but again, I had to limit my notes because these micron pens, I've had some that have lasted for 7 or 8 years on a coated moleskin drawing paper. Now I'm just throwing these things away, just like endlessly. I probably went through 20 pens on this show. Um, and the majority of that is just writing. It wears them down within a couple days, right down to the metal nub.
Well, so the other thing that's really obviously important to talk about is, we've discussed your tools, we've discussed your craft and the writing, but these drawings are also just beautiful for what they are. They're really, the color scheme is beautiful, the design is beautiful. I'm so impressed that, you're working off of a grid essentially for each one of these, yet you get so much variation from piece to piece. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you arrive at these colors, arrive at these different shapes and gradients? You're not only gradient the color top to bottom, but you're also shifting shape slowly.
Yeah.
So what does all that entail?
Um, I guess about 3 years ago, I got it in my head that I could draw my own currency. And this is a recurring theme. Again, I mentioned that we had a extensive graphic arts set up at my high school. And they had a computer at the place, and once it came out, the first thing I got busted for was trying to counterfeit money. I was a teenager. It seemed like fun. We had all these tools and materials and, combined knowledge to be able to do it. And it's a theme I've thought about over and over. And of course, people who have seen my mechanical drawings, my detailed stuff, because this is not detailed by my standards. This is an open, broad, sweeping exercise in color. Um, but these backgrounds are me training myself, gaining experience with the brush so that I can produce them much larger. I mean, many feet larger. Um, and the gradients, I take a lot of inspiration from currency. Not our currency, foreign currency. Tends to be beautiful and colorful, and the colors they choose. You look at one side of a bill and it's this color. You look at the other side and it's this color, and you think, why those two colors? And somewhere in the middle where they meet, where they fade into each other or dive in and out of different geometric patterns, you start at one end looking at orange circle, orange circle, orange circle, and by the time you get to the end, that orange circle is turned into a pale yellow flower that is surrounded by blue circles that snuck up on you. And that piece you're showing, like, there's a few of them that do that. It actually, from the angle, from where you are right now, it even looks blurry. Like when you zoom out on these, and I've always felt my pieces are meant to be viewed image-wise from like 5 or 6 feet away. It looks blurry in the middle to me. It looks like somebody spilled water in the middle, and that's my goal. Is those little subtle tricks you can play with line weight and gradations, and it blows my mind, honestly, that you can do this with a paintbrush. It just takes a bit of practice and being present. And as far as the color choices, motivation changes over the years. Sometimes you see somebody with brightly colored hair and you're like, boom, that's it. It's in my head. That's what I'm doing. With this series, what I started doing is I would lay down 1 or 2 colors, just some circles. And then, on earlier pieces, I would go to a default, like, oh, there's blue over there. I'm going to throw some red and see what happens with them. I know what's going to happen when they meet. On this series, I started, in order to keep moving forward, I noticed that my heart rate would rise when I would take a color. I would look at a color on the page and be like, what color wouldn't go with that? And I'm like, that one would be a horrible choice. And I'm like, all right, done. That's what we're doing. Take the color I think is going to be the worst possible match, to give me the most hideous interaction, and just run with it. Focus on the first circle you're filling in, fill that in, change it, dilute it, keep going. Don't look at anything else. Just focus on the shape you're trying to fill. Stay present. And when you're done, and you don't know until you're done, when you back up and you look across the room at that fade, you're like, damn, that was the one. Like, and it raises your heart rate. It gets you excited. It gets me excited. And, when you're going through a series like this, there's a lot of labor in these. It's hard to stay motivated. It's hard to stay excited. And I got to be honest, it's a lot like, for me, it shares a lot with the way I used to use drugs before I entered a life of recovery. What's going to be the most exciting? What are 2 things that nobody's going to mix? That thrill seeking. And, I think painters and junkies could both relate to this. What's going to be exciting? What has the most pull? What is the most absurd thing I could do? And yeah, that's what informs my color choice. It's not really trying to hit a certain aesthetic, because like I said, I don't know what they're going to look like until they're done. And when I say done, I mean done. Like once that white line goes on, if I don't add that white line, all those pieces are 10 to 20% darker from across the room.
Wow.
Um,
Snaps
so yeah.
everything into place.
Yeah, like, that little thin black line that I choose to leave in some of those pieces was the only time I left those is when I realized that my painting skill was improving. I wanted to showcase the fact that I could hit that little black line without going over. But I also can't look at my pieces. I can't look at all that color without those white lines. All I see is a blur in my mind. So by trapping them with the white, I can now view each one as an individual color. And what I'm looking for is not the blue that I laid down and not the red that I laid down. I want to see the interaction of the 2 framed, to see what those 2 colors do together to make a new color. And I can only see that color when they're trapped in white. It's something that I haven't been able to get by in my mind.
Well, there's so much information here. There's so many different, things that we could discuss about this work. Is there anything that you feel is important to talk about that we've missed?
Not really. There's miles. There's miles of material and information. It's, we're limited by time, which, in the grand scheme of things, is one of my motivations for making this show. I have things I need to learn. I have ideas I want to try out. I want new materials. I want new process. And I'm not getting any younger, So a switch has been flipped in me. My motivation is to just keep exposing myself to things I don't know within my art, and finding new directions. This is all an experiment. That's all this is gaining experience with new materials, new colors, new shapes.
The
And
amount
yeah,
of sheer work in this show is just frankly overwhelming.
yeah.
It's really incredible. I can pan around the room and to know that, you can get right up close to every single one of these drawings and find just a forever of detail and thought and just work. It's an inspiring show. You've got a ton of patience, and clear dedication and clear joy in making this work. The work feels like you're having fun making it, and people watching, you've got to come in and see this in person because I'm getting as close as possible with my camera, but um, it's it's just it's impossible to capture. Um, so, Brian, I really appreciate your time this morning. It's
Likewise.
it's an amazing show. You should
Thank
be
you.
really proud of yourself. And people who are watching, come in and read these notes. They're funny, they're inspiring. I can't help but notice how shaky my hand is when I'm trying to capture all this. Like, in comparison to how steady your hands must be, I'm just trying to like show for a brief second. But
Well,
yeah,
that's an important point too. It's like it's not like I have superpowers. People think that I have this, rock solid thing where my hand can just float and do this stuff. No, I'm drawing on years of fabrication and honestly shooting pool. I've developed a tripod and a bridge that I can use. And the way I use my tools, I use them differently than anybody else I've seen. And I'm always going on the tripod thing because I twitch, I falter all the time. I just find ways to compensate for that by abusing or misusing tools in my own way. So yeah, don't be too hard on yourself. It's, we're all shaky people. We're all shaky people.
well, thanks so much, Brian. Have a
Yeah,
great
thank you.
day. Thank you, everybody, for watching. This show is on view until July 9th. So come on in to see it in person.
Awesome.
Thanks all. Bye.